Like I mentioned before, we're going to be talking about those complex emotions and how we start to address them. We're also going to be discussing the negative impact that COVID-19 has had on mental health briefly, looking at really specific symptoms. So we're going to look at the physiological and psychological symptoms of stress and anxiety so that you're able to identify it for yourself and for your loved ones, talking about self-care and the importance of it and specific coping skills that you can use when you start to feel that anxiety and stress. We're also going to look at some of the crisis resources that are available for our community, and that will be on those sheets that we were talking about being added into that email. When we look at the impact that COVID-19 has had on mental health, that research is really still burgeoning. It takes about 2 years before we get some of that information back, but people are trying to get it as quickly as possible through surveys. And we are starting to get some really good data from the beginning of the quarantine and the pandemic. But across the board, really what we see is that people have been experiencing anxiety, depression, and issues with quality of sleep. If you had a pre-existing mental health condition, there's a high likelihood that you're having more severe experiences of those symptoms. We know that prior to the pandemic, that about 3.7% of Hawaii residents were living with a serious mental health condition, and over half did not receive treatment. So it's about 68%. There's a lot of different complex factors for why that happens, but it just goes to show that even before we experience this increase in symptoms, that a lot of people weren't receiving treatment. And now it seems like there's a much longer wait for people being able to get those services because of the wait lists. And so that's why we have this conversation today, to be able to help people learn those coping skills and self-care as a bridge, or as an appropriate intervention when you're feeling anxiety and stress. And when we talk about mental health, we always have to talk about the importance of suicide prevention and what that looks like currently in the state. I know there's been a lot of question about the impact on the last 2.5 years on safety and suicide. And what we know right now, as the stats remain the same, is that someone in Hawaii dies by suicide about every other day. When we start to look at how that breaks down in general, it is the number one leading cause of death by fatal injury for age ranges 15 to 44. Then it falls to second place for 45 to 74, and it's the second leading cause overall. We do have an updated chart for 2020, but it is the same and similar in terms of categories. If you've come to some of our presentations before, you've probably seen this schematic overview. It seems weird for me to say, but it's one of my favorites. The reason that I like it is because I think it really makes it simple when you start to look at all the different things that can be a risk to your mental health. So what we're going to do is just look across the top, which is setting, and then we're going to go straight down from work to adulthood, because those bottom red options are the different developmental phases. And so I would say that most of us fall under work and adulthood. And as we go down, what it's doing is going through the different levels of systems that we actually interact with, engage with throughout our day. So starting at work, going straight down through adulthood, these are the things that could be a risk for your mental health. So that would be things like discrimination, adverse media influences, job intensity or insecurity, unemployment, bereavement, harmful alcohol use, physical ill health. And if you think about some of the things that we've been hearing about for the last 2.5 years, you can see that actually covers quite a bit of the things that we've been having concerns with or been experiencing ourselves. I think that this is part of what we're looking at when we're looking at those increases in anxiety and depression and sleep issues, is that so many of these things are being impacted on so many different levels.
All right, which brings us to our vulnerable populations. Certain populations would actually benefit from the extra support and extra self-care practices. Some of these vulnerable populations include individuals who are at a high risk or who have contracted COVID-19, individuals with pre-existing medical, psychiatric, or substance use challenges, also healthcare providers and our frontline workers. Certain age groups are keiki, teens, kupunas, and those who are taking care of those age groups, so our other caregivers. Individuals with employment status changes, especially throughout the past couple of years within this pandemic, And lastly, those being socially isolated individuals, marginalized groups, and those experiencing being houseless. These are the types of populations that we actually want to check in on a little more and make sure that they're connected to any possible resources that can help them get through what is going on. All right, so which brings us to our psychological versus physiological symptoms of anxiety. So as we start to feel increasing levels of stress and anxiety, it presents itself in different ways. Our psychological symptoms, those are the things that are happening with our behaviors, which is like our thoughts, our emotions. On the physiological side, those are the things that happen with our bodies. Previously, many people thought that our physical health and mental health were two separate things, but as we can see here, they're very much connected. So when we take care of our physical health, we're actually taking care of our mental health as well. We can start with the physiological symptoms first. So here it's, there's a rapid heartbeat, shortness of breath, chest pains, muscle tension, dizziness, and stomach pain, sometimes even. Keep in mind that we must ask the individual if it's at all possible, if they have a history of any deeper medical issues, because these symptoms here, they are also symptoms, they may also be symptoms of a possible heart attack, panic attack, allergic reaction. So if anything, we would like to connect them to the resources and medical professionals to take care of that medical side first, and then we can help with the mental side. Psychological symptoms, excessive worriness, agitation, restlessness, attention/concentration issues, sleep problems, and avoidance, most importantly.
So let's talk for a moment about resiliency. That is a concept I think that we talk about a lot when we look at the challenges that we've been facing. How do we have individual resiliency, family resiliency, or even community resiliency? And what it really comes down to is the idea of resiliency is encountering something that's difficult, an obstacle, a challenge, and then having what you need to kind of overcome it. Now, the reality is a lot of us come up against those challenges and we don't have exactly what we need, but resiliency would say that you keep looking for it, practicing it, and trying it until you find it. So that's really what we're talking about today. How do you learn, use, and share some of these coping skills so that your system and your support group is more resilient? And the importance here is really focusing on self-care. And I'll be the first person to say that I'm a huge advocate for self-care and a lot of the different elements because it does work. The research does support it, but you also have to think about it in terms of embedded within your systems, your work, your home, your family, because it can be very difficult to change just you and just one small behavior, but still not have the larger system make changes and not be as supportive as you need. So that's really why we also talk about the importance of sharing those skills so that the system becomes more supportive. It's important to plan ahead because when we get stressed, sometimes we think, oh, that will be the moment. That will be the moment I add in the self-care, but it's really difficult to do that because we get stressed, it's harder to concentrate, problem solve. And so if we plan ahead and start using things that we have before we even need it, then it's just at your fingertips. And that's really what we want self-care to be. It's embedded in your schedule. It's easy and maintainable. It doesn't add too much time onto your day, and it adds something instead of taking something away. I have a tendency, probably because I worked with kids for many, many, many years. And I have a tendency, if I see something and I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool, new, like, toy, some kind of grounding skill, something very sensory, that I'll just pick it up and see what I think about it. And then if I like it, then I'll recommend it to the people I know, especially the other providers who work with kids. And I think that it's good to kind of have that in the back of your mind, like what works for me? What do I want to try? And that way, when I see it, I can be like, let me just get it and add it into my schedule without having to be stressed about pursuing it and thinking about it that way. And sometimes it's easy to think, what if I just did it once a month, like focused on adding something in once a month, whether it was 5 extra minutes in the shower every once in a while, or an aromatherapy based product that I use when I'm getting ready. If I just made one small decision once a month, that would be 12 lifestyle changes over a year, which is actually quite a bit. If you say I went from having this amount to 12 more than that amount with very minimal effort, but a lot of kind of return. That's what we're thinking about in that plan ahead. We really need to make sure we take care of just our basics, like our physical needs, our exercise. I do think that people had a tendency to stay home, which is just part of being safe and our risk tolerance. I do think that we typically said, I'm not going to go to the doctor unless it's something really serious. So a lot of our physical needs haven't been addressed as much as they would have because of wanting to make sure that we were safe. That's totally normal. But having to look at it now and think about like, what changes do I feel safe making? Am I eating healthy? Am I staying active? When I'm at work, am I taking the breaks I need to take? If I'm at home and caregiving, am I making sure I'm getting my breaks? Am I staying connected to my support system, or do I feel just really exhausted? And so I'm just kind of keeping to myself. I know it can feel overwhelming to spend that extra energy to reconnect with others, but there's such a reciprocal part of those relationships that can actually help give you energy. The other thing I would say is remember that your best is good enough, and remember that your best changes from the day to day. There are some days I'm like, I should get a sticker for how much I got done today. Right? Like I feel good about my self-care when I got done. And then there are some days where I'm like, I think I should get a sticker because I woke up on time and I brushed my hair. That's my sticker. I mean, that's okay because that is actually quite normal for your best to change and fluctuate. And it's important for us to cheerlead for ourselves no matter where we're at, because we're still, trying to get those things done and take care of ourselves. At the core of self-care is the idea that when we take care of ourselves, we show ourselves that we have value, that we're compassionate to ourselves, that we love ourselves. And why that is so crucial is because the research really does support that compassion maintenance, caring for other people, and being empathetic starts at home. And by home, I mean yourself. So the more that you can practice it with yourself, the more you're likely to give it to others. I think we sometimes will empty our cups out as fast as we fill them to take care of other people, forgetting that we cannot pour from an empty cup and that we really need to focus on ourselves and then move out. We do have the Instagram Live Now, which is a really great reminder. It just pops up reminders for self-care. And that's really how that's how I use it, is that when it pops up, I go, oh yeah, take a breath, take a break, go for a walk. It just kind of gives me that nice reminder and gives me a little bit more information about self-care. It's my personal prompt. So I do recommend if you're interested in checking that out.
So there are many ways that we can practice self-care. The first and most important is to validate our emotions. Tell yourself it is okay to be feeling the way that you do right now. Sometimes we have no control over what happens in our lives, and it is okay to feel the way that you feel. What we do have control over is validating them and how we respond to them and what we're doing to manage those emotions. Other practices include staying connected, checking in with your family and friends, any essential workers, or those who are more valuable or vulnerable in your circle. Checking in with them doesn't have to be like a huge grand gesture. Maybe just a text here and there, how are you doing? We should go meet up and grab some coffee and catch up. Or even a, hey, we should FaceTime and catch up since everything is still virtual. I know I really thank my friends when they check in. Those little texts and things it means so much, like I promise. But most importantly, check in with yourself, see how you are doing. Another self-care practice we can do is to rely on our creature comforts. And for those who have pets, you know what I mean. It's something about the way that the pets love and comfort us with no hesitation at all. I have a dog and, she's technically not an emotional support animal, but to me, she makes me feel better. Like when I have exams and everything, I just cuddle her and I'm good to go. And Dr. G, if you can go to the next slide, please. Continuing on, following a schedule and creating a routine and scheduling in self-care is another form of self-care practice. I have 2 planners. One, it's like a timely day-to-day thing. So everything from 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. at night. And then I have another planner where where it's my academic calendar, and I have to schedule in at least an hour of self-care at the end of my day. What I like to do is actually go to the beach and watch the sunset. Something about that just really calms me, which brings us to spending time in nature. Going outside and breathing in the fresh air and connecting with nature does wonders for your mental health, I promise. And lastly, and most importantly, invest in yourself. I learned over my time at Mental Health America of Hawaii and going through other educational webinars with my school that you are the most important person in your life. Invest in the time to take care of yourself first, and that way that you can take care of others. So always remember that you are the most important in your life. Like Dr. G said, you can't pour from an empty cup.
One of the things I think that's been coming up and been asked pretty frequently is, with the changes that we've seen over the last 2.5 years, how do I know that what I'm seeing is a normal response to what's happening versus this is something that I should be concerned about and check in with for myself or for someone else? And I would say that it's really about time frame and intensity. If someone is experiencing these things every day for at least 2 weeks or longer, then that's where we start to say, hey, are you okay? So that could be mood dysregulation, irritability, depression, anxiety, consistently every day for 2 weeks. Anhedonia is just a really fancy psychological way of saying, I'm doing the things I used to like to do, but they don't feel the way they used to feel. Like they don't get the return. It doesn't feel good. I'm not experiencing it as self-care. This could be someone expressing suicidal thoughts. There's been a significant negative impact on their work or school performance. They're socially withdrawing and isolating. Their daily activities, so again, that's exercise, sleeping, eating, hygiene, that those things have been disrupted and they're having a hard time keeping up with them, or that they're having significant issues in their relationships, and probably more than one. So if those things are happening and they're happening for at least 2 weeks or more, that's when you should start to just ask those questions like, hey, are you okay? I noticed. And it's really important to own that that's your observation and not a fact, so that they can give you feedback as to whether it's accurate or not. So maybe it's that they have been having really big projects and been having a hard time juggling those, or maybe there was a recent loss. I mean, there could be so many reasons for why someone could be exhibiting these, but we start with a conversation. It's really important for us to talk about grief because so many of us are going through it. And the reality is, I think we often assume that it's loss of somebody, but it could also be the loss of something. And if you think about the loss of an expected outcome, so for example, a graduation that you thought would look a certain way, a wedding, a funeral, these big life events that you thought you'd be able to get a lot of support and connection around, that had to be adapted because of what was happening. That's a loss in its own way. The loss of your schedule, your ability to do things, of what you thought the year would look like. There's so many of us kind of going through this process. It could be the loss of a cherished item, a cherished person, a cherished pet. There's so many ways that we experience this, but we always want to talk about it because grief literacy is so important. And a lot of people just assume that this is something that should be done privately and not discussed. But so many of us are going through it and not feeling very supported. So what I would like to say is, if you're in the healing process, do what you need to do and understand that you grieve differently in different moments for different things and in different times. So if you are going through your process, just know that your process could look very different than it has in the past. And that the way you choose to heal could be different than the way someone else chooses to heal, and that's okay. If you're not going through a process, but you know someone who does and is going through it, then it's important just to kind of reach out and say, hey, I care about you. I'm here for you. If there's anything I can do, let me know. Sometimes we talk about the importance of specific help, which would be saying, I'm available on Tuesdays if you'd like me to cook dinner for you. Tell me what you want. Like, it could be really that specific to kind of take that impetus of making the choice off of the person who's also grieving. One complaint that I think that we sometimes get, I know, like, I'll own it, it's a complaint we get, is that sometimes when we talk about assessing, checking in, asking those questions, that it sounds kind of clinical. They're like, Dr. G, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist. Like, I don't want it to sound like I'm trying to be that for someone. And I would say you're right. Make it conversational, be authentic. And that's what's best. That's what's most effective. Because, people will look at you like, what is this? Where's this coming from? And why do you sound like that? So make the conversation comfortable for them and ask questions like, how's your day? How are you doing from the day to day? Like, how's your sleep? How's your mood been? How are your relationships? You're just going to make it very simple and very conversational. And if you're checking in with yourself, it's the same. You'll ask yourself, like, do I still feel connected to people that I care about? Or am I withdrawing from them? Like, how am I doing at work? You're just doing that really great check in with yourself. Like, do I still feel hopeful? Like, I don't know what the future will bring, but I know that the future is there and everything changes. I'm just not sure how it's going to change, but nothing stays the same. And that's a good thing.
Okay, so the Likert scale of responding, this is actually a great tool that people use to check in with themselves and see where they're at and determine the skills and tools that is needed when we're in a certain place. The scale ranges from 0 to 100, divided into 3 different sections. 0 to 40, the first section is when we, generally we feel good. There aren't many feelings of stress. When we get closer to 40, we may notice that there are some feelings of stress and anxiety. Here is where your self-care practices may actually come in handy and may be effective. 40 to 60 is when we are aware that we are experiencing anxiety and stress. We can feel it in our bodies, and it may become evident that our self-care plan may not be as effective. So we look upon our coping skills to help manage our nervous systems. Lastly, 60 to 100 is a range where we feel excessive levels of stress and anxiety. And for that, the next few slides will provide us with different strategies to help us manage our feelings.
I always like to recommend mindfulness. And this can sometimes feel really large to some people who aren't as familiar with mindfulness as a practice. And for those of you who are familiar with it, you're probably pretty aware that the really important daily practice is staying present. Just stay present in the moment, worrying less about what's going to happen and focusing less and feeling less guilty about what's already happened, because we can't change those and we can't make the future occur. So that's why the present focus has so much power. Like, if I just focus on the thing in front of me, the next 5 minutes, the next hour, that's absolutely somewhere I can put my control, put my energy, and make some changes. But outside of that, it is being predictive or being in a place where it's being reflective, but I can't change those two things. One that people are a little bit less familiar with is the idea of radical acceptance. And again, if you've attended our webinars, you've probably heard about this ad nauseum, but it's because it's such an important skill. Radical acceptance is, it is what it is. And what that basically means is I'm going to look at a situation and I'm going to decide what parts are within my control where I can make change, and what parts are outside of my control where it's someone else or something else that makes those decisions. If it's outside of my control, I'm not going to put my energy there because it's unchangeable for me. But if it's in my control, that's where my focus will be and that's where my energy will be. Now, that sounds very simple until you start to apply it to real life. So think about it in terms of a relationship. I cannot control the other person, how they feel or what they're going to do. I can only control myself and my choices. So that's where I'm going to put my focus, is on my behavior, my thoughts, my choices. That gets a little bit harder to do, right? Whether I want to stay, whether I want to go, whether or not I'm going to practice some new skill within my relationship to see if that improves the interaction. Radical acceptance, it is what it is just that. It's a practice. It needs to be done every day in as many situations as possible so that you start to feel the strength of it and being able to take back some of your worries, take back some of your time and energy, and really focus it again on yourself and where you can make change. There's also meditation and prayer that can come from a spiritual practice or a non-spiritual practice. Meditation can be sitting quietly with your eyes closed, doing a mantra, or it could be eyes open, just walking in nature and enjoying the sounds around you. It can come from a lot of different places, but it's about using this to stay present focused. I'll admit, I am guilty of the multitask, but the research says that most people aren't really good at multitasking. And even if you're good at it, what basically happens is if a new stressor comes in, a new challenge comes in, you have to start to pull pieces from all the things you're juggling and take that and put it onto the new item, which is hard to do in a lot of energy. But if you're single tasking, it's much, much easier. And it's important to find times during the day where you can single task. The reality is we're very busy. That is the kind of culture we live in. So as many times in your day as you can say, this is my single task moment, then take it and use it. And you'll find that it actually kind of grows and builds as you start to enjoy those single task moments. When you're communicating with other people, I do think it's important to make sure that you remain accessible to them, responsive to them, and engaged. So I could be having a conversation with you, but if you're on your phone and only looking at me every once in a while, are you accessible? You're responsive, but are you engaged? We need to make sure that those are meaningful connections and that we're really kind of getting that deep attachment fulfillment so that we don't have that tendency to isolate as much. And that's just part of being a good listener. So that mindfulness is important. The meditation is important. And I think we don't always emphasize how simple deep breathing can be, but how effective it can be. It's part of oxygenating the system so that your nervous system calms. And that's really what that 60 to 100 on the Likert scale is. It says my nervous system is activating. I'm having a hard time calming it. And I would recommend trying deep breathing. I would also recommend trying progressive muscle relaxation. You'll also hear this kind of referred to as paired muscle relaxation. And all it means is that the different muscle groups in your body, so for example, your hands, your forearms, that when we over tighten them and then release them, they over relax and release, bringing down your normal level of tension to a lower state. So some of you might be like, well, where did that go? So I'm going to show you how adaptive our brains can be and why progressive muscle relaxation is a fantastic exercise. I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and then you just kind of answer to yourself with whatever your answer may be. So the first question is, how heavy is your shirt or top? Most of you weren't thinking about that at all. And now you are, you're like, Dr. G, why did you even mention that? Unless your shirt weighed 20 pounds, your brain got that information this morning and said, that's okay. That's within the realm of normal, and just moved the information out and adapted. Next question. How tight is your shoe or sock? This is about the time people start to wiggle their toes and think about that. Unless the circulation was cut off by that shoe or sock, your brain again adapted and said, got the information, looked at it, not important, moved it off. Last question. What does the space between your eyes feel like? I always like to do that one in person because then people start to try to look at that space that they never consider. Unless there's something protruding from that space and causing you pain, your brain again went through a body scan this morning and said, not important, adapted to it, move on. Now imagine if the information that it got was, I feel just a little bit more tight in my muscles and a little bit more tense. Your brain would go, oh, that's different, but not so different. I'll adapt and move on. But imagine if that keeps happening day after day after day, that every morning you feel just a little bit more tense, your muscles are a little bit more tight, and your brain just keeps adapting. After several months, you're going to notice that your shoulders move up. You'll start to get those tension headaches, that tightness in your neck and in your shoulders. You'll start to have the muscle pain, but it will have been such a slow adaptation that you might not notice it until it gets to the point where it's actually kind of painful. And there are symptoms of what's happening. Progressive muscle will have you tighten all those different muscle groups so that your brain has to readapt to that lessened tension and goes, oh, okay, well, this is our new baseline. That's why that one's fantastic. Now, for some people, progressive muscle relaxation is going to be that entry point, and I'm going to use my body to relax my brain. And some people are going to want to do it the opposite way. They're going to want to use their brain to relax their body. So that's happening with autogenic training. Autogenic training says I'm going to use something similar to the like self-hypnosis to help myself calm down. So I want you to get in a comfortable seated position, right? Eyes open or close. And then I just want you to repeat after me. My right arm is heavy and warm. Again, my right arm is heavy and warm. Last time, my right arm is heavy and warm. Now shifting focus to the left, repeating after me. My left arm is heavy and warm. Again, my left arm is heavy and warm. Last time, my left arm is heavy and warm. Take in one deep breath. Hold for as long as is comfortable, and then slowly exhale. Autogenic training would say the only way to make your arms heavy and warm is to redistribute the blood back into the limbs. Because when your nervous system gets activated, it pulls it to the center. And by doing a little bit of this kind of like repetition and kind of self-prompting, the hope is that it will move that blood back into the limbs. And then your brain will go, oh, we must be relaxing because we're starting to undo what we did when we felt stressed. This doesn't work for everyone, so I would recommend trying both. Typically people like one or the other, and every once in a while you'll like both. So I always recommend trying both. Grounding is just thinking about how to stay very rooted in your body. When we get stressed, we do typically go into our brains and we start to think about things and get fidgety, anxiety, stress, issues with attention and concentration. And grounding would say, think about your senses, sight, smell, sound, and then engage them in some way to help you to feel relaxed. Aromatherapy is a wonderful one. I use it all the time, but it is one where I would say if you're interested but not familiar, work with someone who is well versed and well trained in it. The reason I say that is it's a wonderful intervention because your smell is the number one sense that is related to memory. So when we think about relaxation, sometimes there's a smell that comes up for you. Oh, it smells like my grandma's house or fresh baked chocolate chip cookies. Have you ever walked into someone's house and they just cooked something and you're like, oh, that smells so good. And you just feel so relaxed. That's probably part of why, because it's such a strong pull to our emotions and to our memories. And that's why aromatherapy can be so effective. But again, if you have allergies, if you have pets or small children, you have to be really careful because some of the oils are not appropriate to be diffused around small children or pets. Some of them are not effective when they are used in too strong a dosage, and some should never go onto your skin directly because it needs to be cut with some type of oil because it can give a little bit of a irritation or burn. It's important to work with someone and to kind of outline those things for yourself. Like, do you have any medical issues, allergies? Who's going to be around those things? What kind of platform or what kind of like modality do you want to use it in? Do you want to diffuse it? Do you want to be able to like put it on your skin? And just to have them select for you what works best for you. We're going to spend just a moment practicing diaphragmatic breathing because I do think, again, that it's such a wonderful practice. So getting into that really comfortable seated position, again, making sure that you have nice posture. What we're going to do is take one hand and place it on your diaphragm, which means your pinky and that hand is going to be resting just right on that belly button. We're going to take the other hand and place it on your upper chest. Diaphragmatic breathing is about pulling a breath from a specific location, which is your diaphragm, and pulling it so that it pulls out more than it does from the chest. We typically are shallow breathers because we're always busy, but thinking about, I'm going to slowly pull my breath from my diaphragm, wanting that lower hand to move more than the upper hand. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to take that deep breath in from our diaphragm through our nose. You're going to hold for as long as is comfortable to you. And when you're ready, just slowly breathe it back out through your mouth. Again, focusing on location. Take that nice deep breath. Hold for as long as is comfortable. Now slowly breathe back out. Now, for those of you who are a little bit more familiar with diaphragmatic breathing, who might practice this more frequently, you can always change it up to do pattern breathing. And you really have to start to think about the location at that point. So for pattern breathing, for example, you would do 2 short from the chest, 1 deep from the diaphragm, and then hold and breathe out. So try it. If you're interested, try that with me. So 2 short through the chest, big through the diaphragm, hold for as long as it's comfortable, and slowly breathe out. Do you see the level of concentration and how it shifts when you start to do pattern breathing? I think it's always nice for those who frequently practice diaphragmatic breathing to try a little bit of the pattern breathing so that they can refocus on the location and really add in that focus element. When we look at that Likert scale, part of what we were talking about, that 60 to 100, that's that high range. What am I going to use in the high range that's really effective for bringing down and calming down my nervous system? If you're familiar at all with therapy, there's a type of therapy called dialectical behavioral therapy that was made by Marsha Linehan. What she did was she kind of said, I work with people who have a difficult time doing emotional regulation, especially when their nervous system gets activated. And she scoured through different types of fields from like biology, psychology, religion, and she started to pull skills that were really effective for her clients. Now, these were things that had been around for quite some time, but she started to say like, these are really effective. And we were like, oh yeah, let's look at those. So those are considered to be distress tolerance skills. And that's really where some of these came from that we typically talk about in our presentations. But it's an awareness of your body does work differently when it's at a high level of stress. So for example, if you're at an 80 and you're really stressed and your nervous system's activated, and you typically are one of those people who get very energized when you're very upset. You're pacing, you're moving. It's helpful for you to burn off the energy through exercise. Go for a run, do a good workout, burn off some of that excess energy before you start to do some of these other techniques. Because if you don't, try to do deep breathing when you are very energized and can't sit still isn't going to be very effective. So if you're high energy, start with intense exercise. You see that pace breathing, that's just pattern breathing or diaphragmatic breathing. The next thing we're going to talk about that you can do is the dive response. This is one I talk about a lot as well. So radical acceptance is up there, mindfulness, but then you have the dive response. The reason I like the dive response is you don't have to communicate with anyone or have a special tool to be able to do it. This is about the fact that we all have a gland in our nose that when it gets wet, it activates. And the reason it does that is that it's part of all terrestrial mammals, so that when they dive underwater, they don't take an involuntary breath and choke or drown. Why is that important for us? Well, when you activate that gland by getting it wet and cold, it slows down your system. It slows down your heart rate and your blood pressure. And those two things go up when you're stressed. So it's an interesting way to kind of quickly calm your nervous system by just going for a swim, submerging your face in a cold bowl of water, or putting a cold wet rag across this portion of your face. All 3 of those methods will activate the dive response and start to calm your nervous system. Now imagine if you paired that with diaphragmatic breathing, you're getting 2 two really great interventions in just 5 minutes. The other thing that it does is because it's cold, the water or the rag, it will also bring down temperature because your temperature goes up when your nervous system's activated. So you get that really great return as well. Paired muscle relaxation, that's progressive muscle relaxation. We just like to remind people there's other terms to it so that if you see it, you'll go, oh, that's the thing I was looking for. It's just called something a little bit different. But those are all great skills to use when you're in the 60 to 100 range.
So every single one of us should actually have a support plan. It's very important. Decide who you can talk to or turn to when you need someone to talk to, especially when you're in that 60 to 100 range. If you have any, healthcare providers, mental health providers, have their contact information on hand. Keep their phone numbers in your contact list on your phone and just know how to reach them whenever and if you shall need to. Lastly, you should ask yourselves what gives you hope. What gives your life meaning? Like I said previously, the most important person in your life is yourself. And Dr. G said you can't pour from an empty cup. I really love that saying now. So always have a support plan on hand, and next, I believe Dr. G will now be providing a list of some of the crisis lines that are out there.
Absolutely. And just to let everyone know, like, I did not come up with that wonderful saying. They always say, like, wisdom shared is wisdom gained. That was something that I picked up from somebody else, a wonderful saying. But it's definitely one of those that stands out for people, including myself. And I just think it's such a perfect metaphor for self-care and why we take care of ourselves. So some of our crisis resources, which you will be getting into a sheet in the post follow-up email, is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and the Hawaii Cares line. We also want to make sure that if you see something and you feel like it's unsafe for someone else, that you know where to call and report that. So this is going to be the number for the Child Abuse Reporting Hotline and the Child Trafficking Reporting Hotline. We know that a lot of people have had to spend a little bit more time over the last 2.5 years at home, and that not every home is a safe place. So we do have hotlines that are specific to that. So there's the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and there's also the Domestic Violence Action Center here in Hawaii, and the numbers are below. There are 2 apps that we recommend that are very evidence backed because they are done by the U.S. Departments of Veterans Affairs and the National Council for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder and are often used by the Department of Defense. So the COVID Coach, these are both free and available. The COVID Coach is great if you want to have some exercises to practice in mindfulness, some recommendations for managing stress, but also a way to kind of check and track your mood. CBTI specifically for sleep, and it does a really great job of mapping your sleep. Sometimes we think, oh, my sleep isn't bad because I'm getting like 8 hours, 7 hours, but this is going to ask you really specific questions like, when did you fall asleep versus when did you want to fall asleep? It's going to ask you questions like, how many times did you wake up in the night? And was it easy for you to go back to sleep? So you can see how it's getting to quality of sleep, not number of hours, which are not always indicative of quality. And then it's going to give you recommendations, and you're going to be able to like set reminders for things that you might want to do in your sleep schedule. So both fantastic. If you're interested in looking up some more of the things that MHH has to offer, if you go to our website, mentalhealthhawaii.org, you can click on the Get Connected banner, and it'll take you directly to some of our classes and downloadables. We even have coloring sheets for our keiki that go over things like grounding, diaphragmatic breathing. And if you're interested in getting a handout on diaphragmatic breathing, there's absolutely one available there. You'll see at the bottom left corner of our screen, that's our QR code. So again, you'll be getting the PDF of these slides, and that'll be available to you. That will link you directly to our survey, which I will also be dropping into the chat in just a minute. But you'll also see right next to that is the screenings. So MHA National has screenings available 24/7, completely anonymous, where you can go in and take it if you're curious about your experiences, whether that's for depression, anxiety, your sleep. And what it's going to do is just kind of give you, after the screening, recommendations and possible resources for you. And it can give you an idea of kind of where you fall in terms of your experience and other people's, to say like, is this something I should get checked on? And then if so, with who? If you have any questions following this presentation, which does sometimes happen, right, you can email us at info@mentalhealthhawaii.org or call our office. So that's our Oahu office down below at the 521-1846. We also have a Maui County office at the 242-6461. I know that was quite a bit of information. It always is, but we want to make sure that people get a little bit of a sample of all the things that can be helpful for self-care and that are good to share and to make sure that you have them. I am going to drop the survey that I was talking about for your feedback into the chat. But I'm also going to drop in our Finding Help directory. So if you're looking for a specific kind of a resource that could be housing, treatment, could be a number of different things, we typically put out our Finding Help directory. And we have updated it as of last summer. We call all the numbers, check in with all the different people who are listed, and it's typically low fee, no fee organizations that do help for the community. And it's great because it is updated as of last summer because we know there's been a lot of changes. And this actually takes you to the online version, which is updated more frequently than our print version. And so those continue to be vetted and updated. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop those into the chat. Getting kudos for you, Jasmine. Excellent. Please feel free to drop those in the chat so we can answer them. But again, if they come up after this presentation, you can always email us at info@mentalhealthhawaii.org. Just waiting for any to see if any come in. I personally would like to give a big thanks to Jasmine for joining us today and being such a fantastic facilitator. We are super blessed to have our MHAH interns to come and join us. I always make the joke, like I'm only slightly cool and like fresh and in the know because of our students, because they keep us like up to date on like research, cool things, ways to interact with different age groups. And sometimes I feel like, oh, like I used to be cool. I just don't even remember anymore. So our students are able to just keep us moving forward and learning and growing ourselves as an organization. We're always so thankful for any time we get to spend with them. And Jasmine definitely is going to always be part of our Ohana here at MHAH. So always thankful for them coming and joining us. I know I always get like sad because I know you guys leave, but I'm like, you're always here. Let me check. Oh, chat is disabled. Okay, if you have any questions or comments, just drop that into the Q&A. Chat is now enabled if you want to use that as well. Zoom's always updating and making me stay on my toes. I don't see any other questions coming in, just a lot of comments about Jasmine being great. Yes, she is. Again, we're going to be making sure that this recording gets put onto YouTube so that it's available for you to be able to share or review. I know that some people aren't able to come just due to the heavy work schedules that we're all going through. And so please feel free to share any of those trainings with other people. We'll make sure that you get the PDF for this presentation as well, so you don't have to kind of hunt down those resources, and you will get the crisis resource sheet and a connection to our Finding Help directory. As with all things, we want you to have time to spend with yourself, to do a little bit of self-care today, and to find something that maybe works for you. We're all just doing our best. We're all just trying to like motivate each other and support each other. So have a fantastic day. And thank you so much for joining us.